Well, good morning, Southern Oregon, and welcome back to the Real Estate Show. So glad you could join us again. Today, my name is Alice Lema. I'm a broker here in beautiful Southern Oregon with John O. Scott Real Estate. And today we get to do a deep dive into all things paint with Dan Drake of Drake's Paints. Now, Drake's Paints has an amazing story. You're going to want to hear this because it sounds like no other paint store ever had this kind of start. So you want to listen to that. But also, Dan is very technical. He knows a lot. He knows why things are the way they are. He knows the good technique, the proper technique, and he knows all the different kinds of paints and why you would want to use them. We're also going to hit him with some questions about getting our houses ready for the holidays, for the winter, and and just pick his brain about all things paint. Dan Drake of Drake's Paints will be joining us on the show today. Before we jump into that interview with Dan Drake of Drake's Paints, just wanted to briefly touch base on some of the SOMLS reports that came out this week. Our local MLS is amazing. You can go on their website, SOMLS, Southern Oregon MLS. But 2-minute reports to read. I just wanted to touch base briefly on some general numbers where Jackson County 5 years has gone up 49%, but year to date has only gone up 6.6%. Also, just wanted to point out Jackson County has a couple of, we've got 5 foreclosures and 2 short sales. We don't see those very often, but I just want to point out I still don't think there's going to be a crash. There's a little bit of normal distressed sale statistics in a regular market, and it's not normal to have 0. So the fact that we have 5 foreclosures year to date and 2 short sales, there's nothing wrong with that. It's pointing to more of a normal, healthy market. Now let's touch base briefly in Josephine County. Josephine County 5-year change, 54%. Josephine County is up 54% in the last 5 years, only 2.7 in the last 1 year. And we have 2 foreclosures in Josephine County and 0 short sales. So just wanted to point out the tides are changing. Again, underscore, don't think there's going to be any kind of a crash, just moderating normal market. Okay. So that's it for the statistics for now. Let's take a quick break with a word from our sponsors and then start our conversation with Dan Drake of Drake's Paints. We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Do not touch that dial. Well, hey, Southern Oregon, welcome back to the Real Estate Show. I'm Alice Lema. I'm a broker here in beautiful Southern Oregon with John O. Scott Real Estate and your host for the day. We're talking to Dan Drake of Drake's Painting here locally. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dan.
Thanks for inviting me.
So one of the fun things about fall is looking at the outside of our paint, the inside of our paint. And just to kind of bring our listeners up to speed, let's talk a little bit about the different kinds of paint, because there's a lot of technical variety, and paint is a really interesting topic.
Mm-hmm. So I think right now with the changing weather and that kind of thing, one of the main topics that I hear is, how can I paint this time of year? Cooler weather, rain, and that kind of thing. And though rain is definitely always an issue, there's nothing that's going to dry when it's getting wet. There are products that will dry in cooler temperatures. Different precautions need to be taken, but there's products that you can use and get a house painted as long as it's 35 degrees or warmer.
Wow, that's actually really cold.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, yeah.
So do they make the paint? What do they do to the paint that it can tolerate 35 degrees?
They put different dryers in there that even though it's cooler temperatures, and that it's still able to kick off and evaporate the water. And so it's just different chemicals that they put in there to get it to do that.
Well, and you know what? It makes sense. And here it is, 2022, all the technology and data that's available to make things more technically advanced. You can surely do it.
Yeah.
So that so is that paint that dries at 35 degrees? I just can't get over that. Sorry. Is that outside paint or inside paint?
It's outside paint. Yeah.
Wow, that's even more remarkable.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Very cool. So what's the difference between paint and stain and sealer? Because a lot of us use those words interchangeably, but they're not the same, are they?
No, no. So paint is more of a surface building product. So it's going on top of the surface. It requires a sealer or a previous paint job that it goes on to. And it's going to build coat after coat and get thicker and thicker as time goes on. Stains, there's different opacities of stains. So you have translucent stains, you have semi-transparent stains, semi-solid stains, and solid color stains. As you get more opacity, you do get more build. However, it can go on a bare wood surface with no primer. It kind of penetrates into the wood and seals that wood from moisture getting into it and that kind of thing, but there's no primer that's on there. Stains are typically flat. We have stains that go on flat, and then you can put sheen levels on top of it if you want, like the log home that has that really nice gloss sheen on there and that kind of thing, and it gives it a little bit better protection.
Okay, and does that need a primer?
That does not. No.
Wow.
Yeah,
well, you can save yourself a lot of steps, huh?
Yeah, yeah. And the paint will last longer because anything that is solid gives more UV protection, because the UV hits that and bounces off. So paint is a longer lasting thing. Stain is a maintenance thing that you have to keep up with. If you don't keep up with it, things can go and get to be a big problem pretty quick. So you just have to watch it, and every spring see if it's time to freshen things up or if you can go another year.
So how often, well, I guess you're going to have different maintenance timelines then, depending on the product you're using.
Yeah. And it's going to depend on the side of the house. So the shady side of the house, it may be 10, sometimes 15 years before you're going to have to revisit that and do a fresh coat and that kind of thing. On the sunny side of the house, depending on the product, depending on if there's shade trees in there, you may have to look at it in 3-5 years and freshen it up. So it really varies depending on the exposure. On a deck, it's going to be even worse because it's getting beat upon all day, and it really never gets a break until the sun goes down. So the decks are going to be more often.
Mm-hmm. So going back to, you were talking about like this, the sunny side of the house. Is it okay to paint just the sunny side of the house?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically not paint the other 3 sides of the house, just the sunny side, and not.
Yeah. Can that be your maintenance every so often instead of doing the whole thing every couple of years, just because it's definitely worn on one side?
Yeah, because the other sides are going to be fine, whereas the sunny side of the house is going to need another coat much quicker. So a lot of times people will do that. They'll just paint the side that's getting the sun hit really bad, and they'll leave the other sides for another paint job later, and they'll maybe skip it once, and then the next time paint everything.
That was my next question, like how many times, because we all drive by houses and then we can see like they only painted one side of the house. So how do you blend that a little bit so that it's not so noticeable?
Well, you definitely always have to go corner to corner. So if it's the front of your house, you want to paint the entire front. You don't want to have a little bit painted and a little bit not. And then, I mean, you may make it even 2 cycles before you have to paint the other sides of the house. But you just have to watch it. You'll notice the sheen level will go from it's something that has a little bit of sheen down to a flat. And so it's time to paint because the sheen's gone. Or you might notice variations in colors and it's a little bit mottled looking, and obviously it doesn't look right, so you need to get a paint job on it.
And that's sun damage, is that what you would say?
Yeah, almost always. I mean, it can be a sprinkler going up and hitting the house too often and that kind of thing. So it can be other things, but more often than not, it is the sun damage, the UV that the sun that causes the damage.
So what about colors? Because some people say that some colors, darker or lighter, will wear differently. What's your opinion on that?
Definitely a darker color is not going to last as long as a light color. That being said, a light, bright yellow probably won't last as long as a black will. Because yellow...
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, yellow doesn't hold up as well as a black color does, or a bright red. Brighter colors are man-made colors pretty much. Therefore, they won't hold up as long as the oxides, which are more mined from the earth, and they're just more, you got more color longevity with those.
So darker colors fade sooner. Yellow doesn't last at all. But yellow's not that popular, is it? Do you find that people buy a lot of yellow for their house?
I mean, bright yellow, no. But like a nice creamy soft yellow, it's fairly popular. And with it being a little bit softer, not real bright, it does last a lot longer than the bright sun yellow that I have had people use, but it's not very often that's...
No. Do they paint over it? When they paint it sun yellow, do they paint over it after?
Not usually, because it's a lot of work and people live with it. We have had a guy who was upset with his neighbor, and he came in and asked for the ugliest, brightest yellow he
could. For reals?
Oh gosh, yeah.
Oh wow.
And when we asked him, he goes, "I just can't stand my neighbor, and I want him to look at my house and know that I did this just for him."
Oh goodness, I don't even want to know the backstory on that one.
Oh, and I don't know how it went, how it got to that point, but yeah.
Well, we're talking with Dan Drakes of Drake's Paint, painting company and supplies. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you started your painting company?
So it's not a painting company because we don't paint. We are a paint supplier.
Paint supplier. Okay. Yeah. So paint supply company.
Paint store. Yeah. So it's kind of a different story than probably every other paint store in the Valley. Well, I know it's a different story than every other paint store in the Valley, but it's a different story than most paint stores in the country. And that is, my father and 2 uncles used to paint houses. They were painters. They started with the unions down in California through the apprenticeship program, painting houses. And they had a job where they were required to use Benjamin Moore. The customer demanded that they use Benjamin Moore. Well, Benjamin Moore wasn't available in the Valley. And so they ended up driving to Klamath Falls to pick up the Benjamin Moore from a Klamath Falls store. That spurred them to use it and get to know the product a little bit. And by doing so, they ended up loving it so much. They saw the difference in quality from anything else available in the Valley that they ended up driving back and forth to Klamath Falls because they felt their customers deserved the best. And
wow.
they would go to Klamath Falls and pick up their paint so that they could give their customers the very best. And from there, a company named Baker's Paint, they sold them their paint store because they retired, and they changed the name to Drake's Paint. And at the time, it was they were selling a product called Martin Sonor, and they ended up keeping that for probably 10 years. But they called Benjamin right away and said, "Hey, we'd like to put your paint in our paint store." And Benjamin, because there was nobody in the valley, was happy to do so.
Wow, what a great story. That is so great. We're talking to Dan Drake of Drake's Painting Supply Store here locally. We're going to have to take a quick break just to say thank you to our sponsors. We are gratefully brought to you by Guy Giles, Mutual of Omaha Mortgage, John L. Scott, both Ashland and Medford offices, and also our local Rogue Valley Association of Realtors. We're going to be back talking with Dan Drake of Drake's Paint Supply Store here locally in just a quick minute. So please do not touch that dial. We're going to be right back. Well, welcome back to the Real Estate Show, everybody. We're talking to Dan Drake of Drake's Paint Supply Store here in the Valley. Thanks for being on the show with us today, Dan. Thank you. Glad to be here. Yeah, right before the break, you were telling us how your family started the store. Gosh, quite a while ago. It sounds like your dad and your uncles. When was that? When were they just starting? They started the paint store in 1984. They started in the early 60s painting in Southern California. And they painted there until they wanted to get out of the hustle and bustle of California, and they came up to back when it was really not that busy. No, yeah, it was not nearly what it was. And yeah, they tell me all kinds of amazing stories about growing up in Redondo Beach, and it sounds like an amazing place to grow up. That's for sure. Oh yeah, those days are gone for sure. Yeah. So, how did you get looped into the family paint store business? So, 1991, they needed somebody to help out at the paint store, and I had just graduated, and my uncle came to me and asked me if I wanted to work at the paint store. And I was in a job I wasn't real thrilled with, and I thought, yeah, I'd love to do something different. So I came on board and really enjoyed it. And I think more than anything, I really liked the entrepreneurial aspect of helping them run a store, because at that time I didn't know a whole lot, but I was involved in a lot of what was going on in the paint store, because there was just me and one other person at that time working in the paint store. Mm-hmm. How big is your store now? Now we've got 8 employees. Oh, wow. We went from I think our store was around 1,800 square feet when we started, and we're in a store that's over 8,000 square feet now. And goodness sakes, bursting at the seams. That's great. And you could use more space than you have. More space and more employees would be great. Oh, that's wonderful. So you hear that, folks? Drake's Paints. If you've got a hankering for being in the paint business, you can call Dan. So going back to the actual material of paint, one of the questions I get as a realtor all the time is, well, somebody can just come along and paint that themselves. They don't have to have a professional. And I've noticed over the years that it really doesn't look good or last very well if you don't have a professional. What are your thoughts on that? I guess it depends on what you're painting and what kind of time in that you have. One thing I recommend people think about when they're thinking about doing their own paint job is to kind of go figure in your mind what it's going to take, how much time it's going to take, and effort that it's going to take, and think about that, and then multiply it by 2 or 3, and that's probably about where you'll be.
So know that you're going
Oh,
to spend a lot of time doing that, and if your time is more valuable than the money it would cost, then you might want to hire a painter. If you're very picky about straight lines, no brush marks, and perfection, then that's another thing you'll want to think about, because it does take some skill. Painters aren't just painters because they just decided they wanted to be a painter all of a sudden. They've got many years perfecting their skill, and there is a definite difference between a quality painter and somebody who has not done it before. So
yeah, that's what I started noticing over the years too, that there really is a huge difference, not only in how it looks initially, but how long it looks good.
right, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, I've got 30-year relationships with painters. I know the painters that put the effort into their jobs. They have great ethics, and they also they're meticulous about making sure their customers have a nice job and it's clean and that kind of thing. So it's just it's always good to make sure you call and talk to somebody who knows the people that are going to be on the job, and make sure that you've got somebody that's going to do the job you want them to do.
So when people are using some of the newer products, I noticed that there's chalkboard paint that's available now. You can put that on your walls so your kids can actually draw on it. There's also some well, let's start with that. Let's just start with interior kind of specialty paints, chalkboard, any special kinds of trims, anything new coming down the pike that's super cool to talk about?
So there's definitely chalkboard paint. It's not really new, but it is a fun little accent you can do in a kid's room that they can really have a good time writing with chalk on the walls. And sometimes people think, well, that teaches kids to write on walls. Well, not really. If you work with your kids and just make sure they know that wall is the only one you can write on, it actually works out pretty good for them. And you can pretty much get any color of chalkboard you want for your kids.
Oh, it doesn't have to be black?
It doesn't have to be black or the green. You can go any color. Just know you have to pick a chalk color that will show up on whatever color you choose.
Okay. So what about the specialty paint that's used when you're refurbishing cabinets? Instead of buying new cabinets, people will have a professional painter come and paint. What is that product like?
So a cabinet paint it's different from a wall paint in that it's made to flow out, and brush marks to flow out of it and look more smooth and try to get more of a sprayed look on cabinets. That's one difference. The other thing is on cabinets, you want it to be something that dries to a much harder surface so that you can scrub it. It's going to withstand a lot more wear and that kind of thing. On walls, you're putting it on larger surfaces. You want coverage, hide, and obviously durability as well, but you want more build typically than you would on cabinets. And flow isn't nearly as important because you're just rolling it on there. 90% of the time you have a texture there, so any of the roller marks kind of get hidden by the texture and that kind
Gotcha.
So you don't need that flow. You need hide and coverage and that a lot more so.
So I didn't realize that cabinet paint was that much different, but it really is.
Oh yeah, and typically higher sheens as well, and that kind of thing as well. So
how long will painted cabinets? Well, I guess it depends on your use, but let's say an average person who's not slamming their stuff around all day long, how long do you think it would be before they'd have to repaint those cabinets?
So if you're taking decent care of the cabinets, your sink's not flowing over the counter onto the doors, you're not dripping water down the faces of the cabinets and that kind of thing. I've had customers that have cabinets for 20 years and they
Wow.
say they're
Painted
ready.
cabinets?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And they're more ready to change the color than the cabinets are worn out and cabinets with the paint. So
Okay.
if you think about it, if you do a good product, the right product, and you do a good job on it, good preparation and that kind of thing, you can save money by spending a little extra on the product and having it done correctly than if you use something inexpensive that doesn't do as good a job as and last as long. If you use something that's not a quality product, you're probably looking at 5-10 years, and you're going to need to redo those cabinets.
That is a much longer time than I was expecting. 5 to 10 years. That's amazing. But it has to do with using the right materials, the right tools, and the right people for the job.
Correct.
Yeah. So one of the other kinds of paint that I've come across over the years is fireplace paint. And that is also a special kind of paint, isn't it?
Yeah. Are you talking like painting your wood fire stove or whatnot?
Yeah. Just anything that's going to get hot because of wood or pellets or something.
Yeah. You need something that's going to be a high heat paint. And typically those are spray cans versus brush and roll. You can get the brush and roll type, but the spray cans are typically what are used on like a fire.
Did not know that.
Or whatnot. Yeah.
And how is it different? What is it about the paint that makes it fire or heat resistant or heat tolerant?
What?
Heat tolerant.
Or heat tolerant. Okay. And it has a lot to do with chemicals and raw materials that don't burn and that kind of thing. It's always a lot more expensive because of a higher grade of product. A lot of paint has different minerals in the paint, and some minerals are very resilient to heat, and others, when it gets to be 150 or more, they're going to start discoloring and then start failing and that kind of thing. So the minerals that they put in there are going to be very important, as well as the resins to hold all the minerals together and that kind of thing.
So if someone purchases a home and their fireplace is painted, how do they know that it was the wrong kind of paint that was used? Like, what are the little signs?
So if it's just like the bricks on the outside of the fireplace, typically that's not going to get hot enough to need a high heat product. Because the outside of the bricks are going to get maybe 120 degrees or something like that. A good quality paint that you can put on there would probably go up to 150, 200 degrees without any issue. And that's going to be hotter than you're going to want to you wouldn't want to put your hand on something like that. So and usually your bricks are not going to get that hot, so you can just use a good quality wall paint in different sheen levels that you might want to do, and it'll be just fine.
Oh, so and that's on masonry or brick or rock?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so not so big of a concern then. That's good.
Not on that. I painted my fireplace 12 years ago, and we've had both fires in the open fireplace and a wood stove that got really hot, and it's held up just fine. No problems whatsoever.
Good. Well, good information. We're talking to Dan Drakes of Drake's Paint Store here locally in Southern Oregon. We're going to have to take another quick break to say thanks to our sponsors, and then we'll be back. And also just a reminder that this broadcast will repeat again tomorrow on Sunday at 6 o'clock. So you can listen to Dan Drake all over again. But For now, just don't touch that dial because we'll be right back. Well, welcome back to the Real Estate Show, folks. I'm Alice Lema, your host of the show. Today, we're talking to Dan Drake of Drake's Paint Store here locally. Dan, thanks again for being on the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, in the last little seconds that we were talking about specialty paints for fireplaces, wood stoves, chalkboards, things like that, wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the more environmentally friendly, because that's a real big push for paints to kind of go that direction. What kind of technology is helping with that?
So paint manufacturers they've taken a lot of the solvents out of paint. They've found ways to produce paint without having those in there. Mm-hmm. Initially, when they started doing that, painters they really didn't want to use those products because they didn't work well. But mm-hmm. as they perfected them more and more, nowadays all of our products that are sold out of our store today are all either low VOC or zero VOC, which is volatile organic compounds. And that's the portion of paint that evaporates and goes into the air. And so really, you don't have to sacrifice quality or ease of application any longer, and that to get an environmentally friendly product on your house or walls.
That's wonderful. Nice. Yeah. And that took a lot of trial and error over the decades, didn't it?
Oh, it definitely did. I would say it's been probably about 24, 25 years since I saw the first low VOC paint. And from that point until now, the quality of the product and that is absolutely astonishing.
That's amazing. And I guess that's really just like one lifetime, half a lifetime. If you look at the scheme of the world, that technology kind of advanced pretty quickly. I know 20 years is a lot to us, but in the scheme of things. So let's talk a little bit about things that people could do differently, things that you see a lot that would be so easy to fix if somebody just took 10 seconds, got something more prepared.
Yeah, I see people pretty much on a very regular basis trying to shorten the process of getting a good paint job, cutting out steps. Don't sand, don't prime, do one coat instead of two coats. The problem with doing that is usually when you don't do a step somewhere along the line, and it may be 3-4 years from the time you paint, but somewhere along the line, it almost always has repercussions. If you don't sand, and not always does it need to be sanded, but there are definite times that it does need to be sanded. And if you don't sand when it does need to be sanded, and you try to use a shortcut product that removes the sanding phase, you end up having immediate issues with adhesion. The look of the job usually isn't as good. And so cutting out steps that are fairly necessary to save time, usually in the long run, will end up costing you time. So that's, I think, probably one of the most common thing.
I saw someone who had, and they did their own house. There's nothing wrong with doing your own house, but they brushed over bugs.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that.
We're walking around the outside of the house, and at first you think it's just some little texture or something, and then you're like, oh no, that was a bug.
Yeah, that is one thing I don't recommend doing.
Well, it's not going to stay. It's going to chip right off.
Yeah, bugs don't adhere to the house real well. Definitely.
Yeah. So a proper paint preparation is going to involve what main steps?
So if you're talking about painting the outside of your house, typically a pressure wash of the house is going to be necessary. Typically, I would recommend some type of chemical while you're pressure washing your house, because it will kill mold, mildew, even though there may not
Oh,
be
that's super
visual.
cool.
Yeah, yeah. And you may not see the mold or mildew, but if it's there, it can create problems down the road if painted over. So it's always a good idea to use a chemical wash, pressure washer. When you're pressure washing, the pressure washer is there to clean stuff off your house. It's not there to remove paint or anything like that. You can destroy your siding with a pressure washer if you're not careful. So you always want to be very careful while pressure washing your house.
So not full blast.
Not, yeah, back off away from the surface, and yeah, definitely. So that scraping, if there's any loose product, using the correct primers, fillers, and that kind of thing to make sure that that what you're putting on there is the right thing. Don't paint over loose paint is very, very important. But the one thing, if you've not done it, you just come in, tell us what you want to do, and we can help you through the process.
Oh, there you go.
Pictures, and we can say, yeah, this is going to be real easy, or there's a lot of work that needs to be done before you tackle this. Is it really important?
Well, and we only have a few minutes left. We're going to have you back because I got a lot more questions. But I know that some of our real estate clients wanted me to ask about lead-based paint, and because we have so many older homes in Southern Oregon. With the last couple of minutes we've got, let's talk about that.
So with lead-based paint, there's a lot of processes that should be taken when you're scraping, sanding, and that kind of thing on a lead-based house. Mm-hmm. You don't want to just scrape the house, let all the chips from the house fall into the ground, and eventually that lead goes into the drainage and that kind of thing and mixes in with the water, and it can be a serious problem, and that's why they've pretty much cracked down on it. Best thing on a lead-based house is to hire a lead certified contractor that knows every aspect of what it's going to take to get that job done and get it done correctly that doesn't hurt the environment. Lead is common in older homes. That's early 70s and a little bit earlier than that. So we have lead check kits that you can take and try, or you can put it on the surface and it'll turn pink if it's got lead in it. And so you can test it and make sure that there is or isn't lead. But if your house is an older house, I always recommend checking that and making sure, because you certainly don't want to have it into the groundwater and that kind of thing and have your kids come down with some lead poisoning or something like that.
Yeah, or your pets or the neighbors.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, pets. Yeah, your neighbors. Yeah, they wouldn't be too happy about it.
The one without the bright yellow house.
Yeah.
You had to hear the beginning of the show, folks. You'll have to listen to Dan again tomorrow. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time. Drake's Paint Store. How do people call you? We've got 10 seconds. Give us your phone number.
All right. Phone number is 541-773-3335. And we're at 2929 North Pacific Highway.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan Drake. We'll see you guys next week. Have a beautiful weekend, folks. Bye now.